We survived. We survived this far.
Day 3.
Day 3. Right. Mike. Sponsored content. So you all know what sponsored content is now after watching that video, and I'm sure you're all familiar with The Onion. It often satirizes the news, so I'm particularly interested in hearing what you have to say because I work in the news, and I find it absolutely hilarious the way you manage to make fun of us, journalists. Let's talk about sponsored content, Mike. Why is it such a problem?
Yeah, I think, as the publishing business has evolved, publishers online have had to find a way to make money, and many of them have gravitated to sponsored content or creating content for advertisers. And I think the challenge that most people have had is even though there's a lot of dollars for advertising, they create content that's pretty terrible. And so that video that you just saw was really satirizing how most people, when they create sponsored content, talk down to the audience and really kind of make it insulting to buy your product. And so that video was all about, obviously, making fun of that approach that most people do.
So it's almost easy for you to make fun of certain people. So journalists, for example, reporters, news organizations, The Onion has a long history of making fun of the news. And if you look at the news landscape in the US now, do you feel that it's becoming easier than ever to do it?
I'd like to say it's easier because it's becoming more ridiculous, although it's kind of hard to parody something that's sometimes parodying itself. But ultimately, I think what The Onion does so well is it really satirizes any powerful institution that kind of dominates our minds and kind of lacks the ability to tell the truth and tell what's really going on. And there's a great Onion News Network video that we had done a few years back that kind of really sums up what The Onion is, and it's a video titled "Some Bullshit Happening Somewhere." And it's really a spot-on parody of what CNN does and Fox News does all day, where they just cover the same thing without anything
rolling
new to say.
news, essentially, what you're making fun of.
Exactly.
So a lot of people will know of The Onion from reading hilarious articles online. But The Onion has developed over the last few years and expanded, and you've done things like Onion Labs. Can you fill me in on more of what that's about?
Yeah, so the Onion at its core is a creative company creating the best content around, whether it's The Onion, the AV Club, which is our pop culture site, Clickhole, which parodies all things on the internet, and Starwipe, our most recent brand. And Onion Labs is the way that we really monetize that audience. So that's another way of saying, in order to support the creative ventures we want to pursue, we had to find a really smart way to work with advertisers. And for us, it was building out this division, Labs, which creates content on behalf of advertisers.
I can only imagine that must be such a risky strategy, though, for you guys, because your brand is so important to you, and the integrity of The Onion is that it wants to be in a position where it can poke fun at brands and organizations. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I think the first thing we do is we approach brands and work with brands who get it. We teach them as part of our sales process that they need to be in on the joke if they actually want to reach our audience.
But are they reluctant to do that? Are they protective of their own identity and not willing to make fun of themselves?
Yeah, I think there's some brands who definitely are like that. So if I look back 6 or 7 years ago, I remember Ford told us they would never advertise with The Onion. And the reason is they thought it was too edgy of content. Fast forward to this year, Ford ran one of our biggest campaigns on Clickhole. And the reason they did is they realized they had to do something different, in terms of their marketing strategy in order to engage with a younger audience. And so I think what you're seeing is just, kind of these older brands or brands that sometimes take themselves too seriously, starting to wake up to the realization that younger people don't like traditional marketing, and they have to take their brand a little less seriously if they want to build that brand with the younger audience.
So people want a little bit more. It's not enough just to say, hey, we've got a product we want you to buy.
Yeah, I think anyone who's young finds that, not even doesn't work, they find it offensive. And I think you have to respect the intelligence of your audience, and I think that's what The Onion's done so well forever. You can't get an Onion joke unless you know what's going on in the world. And sadly, there's a lot of people who can't get those jokes.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that a little bit later, but let's first chat about some of the companies and brands that you have actually worked with. Can you give us a sense of the variety, the sheer variety of companies and partnerships that Onion Labs has been working with?
Yeah, so we work with all the entertainment, companies, whether it's Netflix or HBO or Fox. We also do a lot of work for some more traditional brands, whether it's Clorox or Dove or Febreze.
I've heard you've also worked with Jameson, is
And
that right?
we also support our favorite whiskey, Jameson.
So we have a clip where we can share with you right now, Jameson.
Tradition. To some it is just a word like absquatulate or nymph, but to the Onion, it is everything. For nearly 3 centuries, the Onion has been a beacon of honesty in a world teeming with lies. Through the ages, the Onion has sought to enlighten and edify the simple-minded reading public, to illuminate truth, to speak for those without a voice, and to maintain the tradition of corporate fealty and commercial acquiescence that has always made it great. And like the Onion, Jameson has its own tradition, one of excellence, integrity, and being very old. Whiskey has always been an eager bedfellow of journalism, through times of peace and times of peril. And now, we are proud to present the Onion Review, a recap of the week's news as vital to the continuance of human life as air or water or microwavable pastries. The Onion Review, a new tradition every week, premiering April 7th at theonion.com. Brought to you by Jameson.
So that's obviously really funny. People will think back to all of the various ads they've watched over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and to Jameson's credit, they really embrace the joke, and they find a way to trade off what the Onion does so well by not taking themselves seriously. And that, series that they brought to life did super well, was super engaging, and it was a really successful campaign for them.
But, it kind of goes close to the bone a little bit, doesn't it? No Jennifer Lopez news today.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the Onion does so well, and I think with advertising, you have to stay to the same principles, with the rest of content you create. And so what makes the Onion unique from many companies is all of our sponsored content is actually created by our Onion editorial staff. And the reason is they want to make sure that anything that appears on our site has the same principles as the rest of the editorial content, and ultimately, they want it to be just as good.
So let's talk about social media because, now people are consuming content in so many different ways. They're not just going onto their computer, logging in and, going to a website. They're sharing content through their social networks. And if they find something they find funny, they obviously want to share it with their friends. Mm-hmm. So what's the Onion's strategy about how it's used in social media at the moment?
Yeah, I think it begins with everything with the right joke and having the right target and, ultimately creating something that is funny, but also has a truth underneath it. And what we found with social media is the Onion's kind of a natural, because for us it starts off with a headline. Everything is, every headline's under 140 characters, and it's naturally really, funny stuff that has a point to it, all within the headline itself. And so we've done an extremely, good job of engaging our audience just because we've been really creating social media style content from headlines for years.
It's become very sophisticated now in the ways in which brands are making content that almost seem like they organically go viral. And so I can think of so many examples where, there's a piece of content. Let's take a really famous example like the ad, Like a Girl. It won so many awards. It went massively viral. It was all about gender equality and how young girls or young women are treated, what it feels like to be a girl. And then at the end, it was a product for sanitary towels. So the risk of doing something like that while making a powerful piece of content is that the user or the person who's consuming the content might feel a little bit duped by the end of it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the kind of biggest challenges of all sponsored content. And something we do a really good job of is we make sure we always abide by the principle of train, not trick your audience. So every time you're going to consume something that's sponsored, we want to make sure that you know it's sponsored beforehand. And as part of that, we usually make fun of sponsored content similar to that video you saw to kick things off, where we want a brand to be in on the joke. And I think if you do that the right way, no one's ever duped. No one's ever like, oh, why am I watching this? And then they're like, oh, it's an ad. They actually say, this is something that's really funny that happens to be advertising. But things need to stand on their own comedic merits in order for an audience to find them worthwhile.
And how much is the audience dictating actually what content is made? Because, if you look at even the way in which news is unfolding, there are a whole new set of agents involved now, citizens themselves, private citizens who use social platforms and can create huge movements online. So how much can they actually set the agenda, or is that something that you look at?
Yeah, we handle everything differently. I mean, we definitely write for our audience, but first we write for our writers' room, and our writers pick the jokes that they really want to write about. And I think that's one of the reasons why The Onion is the most respected comedy brand, arguably in the world, is because it has that unfettered commitment to making sure only the best and most unique jokes are created.
Has there ever been an instance where you've partnered up with a brand, you want to do something very, very risky, and they go with it, and they're just really not happy with the result?
No, we've been pretty good. I mean, we spend a ton of time in our sales process making sure.
There must have been one.
Right.
Come on.
There
must be at least one example.
There's not one where we've had it where people aren't comfortable with the edginess. We have tons of people who, as part of the courting process, to say, this isn't for me. Once we get into work with someone, we make sure they really believe in the same goals we do, which is if you can't create something that your audience likes, it's not going to work. And so. Advertisers are smart enough to know when they engage with us that they have to trust us if they want to be successful.
Who would you say is the audience who are consuming content on The Onion now? Who are they?
Yeah, it's 18 to 34-year-olds. It's primarily male. It's high household income, highly educated. It's the smartest of the smart. It's, any bad buzzword like influencers. We have those. And, ultimately, it's just a really, kind of smart audience.
So they need to be really sharp in order to get the joke, because we were talking about this backstage, and you were telling me that, your writers were writing about Syria and President Assad long before news organizations were covering the crisis in Syria.
Yeah, and I think that's really what Satire is all about. So our team is super smart, and they care about society, and they're trying to write about things that the media should be covering, but they're not. It's kind of holding, the limelight on the media, saying, hey, this is something really important. People should care about this, and let them know about it. And so we wrote a ton of pieces on Assad. The New Republic actually wrote an article saying the best op-ed page in the country is The Onion, because it's the only, place that speaks the truth and actually brings light to issues that no one's talking about.
Yeah, and parody and satire is actually such a powerful vehicle for getting that point across, whether it's a political or a social movement online. The Onion is almost like, a conduit for that, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's where, The Onion began in newsprint 27 years ago. And because it had a unique voice and perspective, and a perspective, that ultimately was smarter than the other news outlets, it became a comedy institution. And I think it has a responsibility to always, uphold that tradition.
Who do you think is doing satire really, really well? Because I have to say, personal favourite of mine is Jimmy Kimmel. I still laugh when I watch the spoof or the skit that Hillary Clinton did when she went on and she made fun of Donald Trump, and they're tapping into, the presidential race at the moment in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many great satirists out there. I think two of my favorites are Stephen Colbert and John Oliver. And both those television shows happen to be powered by a lot of alumni from the Onion networks. And I think it just really speaks to having that smart perspective. And I think both those guys and their teams are extremely talented.
I've got time for just one last question. What next for the Onion?
For us,
What
it's-
layer of the onion are you going to unveil next?
What layer are we going to peel next? Yeah, I think for us, a lot of our focus is, obviously continue to do what we do best, but also get into long-form content. We have an audience that wants the Onion to create, bigger programming. We have a writing staff who writes for television for other places, and so we want to really build out the studio arm of our business.
Brilliant. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. Mike McAvoy of The Onion, thank you very much. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you.